The brain is not merely tissue. It is the archive of our fears, desires, and silences. When the body suffers, it often echoes the unspoken dramas of the mind, grief hidden in the chest, guilt lodged in the stomach, loneliness pressing on the heart. Healing begins when we dare to confront those shadows, to narrate what was denied, to embrace the vulnerability we once feared. The body listens to the truth we allow ourselves to speak. In the reconciliation between psyche and flesh, the miracle of recovery emerges, not as magic, but as the profound act of integration. When we speak of illness, we often imagine it as something that arises from outside, a foreign invader that disrupts the natural order of our body. Yet so many times, the true origin of suffering lies within us, hidden in the depths of our own history. The body becomes the stage where unresolved dramas are performed, where silences take shape, and where the unspoken finds its voice. To understand this, we must dare to look beyond the surface of symptoms and ask ourselves, what pain has not been named? What wound has not been healed? What truth has not been spoken? There are moments in life when the body begins to whisper through discomfort, through fatigue, through inexplicable aches. At first, we dismiss these signals, believing them to be minor inconveniences, but the body is patient, and when ignored, it speaks louder. A migraine may be more than a neurological imbalance. It may be the echo of a grief we never allowed ourselves to mourn. A stomach ulcer may be more than acid. It may be the corrosive guilt of a decision we regret but never confronted. The chest tightens not only from poor circulation, but from the weight of loneliness that presses against the heart. These are not metaphors. They are realities that countless people live every day. The hidden traumas we carry do not vanish simply because we refuse to acknowledge them. They remain buried beneath layers of silence, waiting for a moment to emerge. And when they do, they often choose the body as their messenger. The body becomes the canvas upon which the psyche paints its unresolved conflicts. It is as if the body says, if you will not speak, I will speak for you. This is why healing cannot be reduced to pills or procedures alone. Healing requires courage, the courage to unmask what has been hidden, to confront the shadows that dwell within us. Consider a child who grew up in a home where love was conditional, where affection was withheld unless perfection was achieved. That child learns to silence their needs, to suppress their anger, to bury their sadness. Years later, as an adult, they may find themselves battling chronic fatigue, autoimmune disorders, or anxiety that manifests physically. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. The trauma of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the hunger for love, all of these live on, shaping the way the body functions. To heal, that adult must return to the child within, must listen to the voice that was silenced, must allow the pain to be named. Unmasking hidden traumas is not an easy task. It requires us to step into uncomfortable territory, to revisit memories we would rather avoid. But it is precisely in that confrontation that healing begins. When we give words to what was denied, when we allow ourselves to cry the tears we never shed, when we admit the anger we buried, the body responds. It is as if the body sighs in relief, finally freed from carrying the weight of secrets. The immune system strengthens, the nervous system calms, the heart beats with greater ease. Science may explain these changes through hormones and neurotransmitters, but the deeper truth is that the body listens to the psyche. There is a profound dignity in acknowledging our wounds. To unmask trauma is not to weaken ourselves. It is to reclaim our strength. It is to say, I will no longer allow silence to dictate my health. In that act of recognition, we begin to integrate the fragmented parts of ourselves. We stop living as divided beings, one part carrying the pain, another pretending it does not exist. Instead, we become whole, and wholeness is the foundation of healing. I've seen people who, after years of physical suffering, found relief not in medicine alone, but in the act of narrating their story. A woman who carried the secret of abuse for decades discovered that her chronic pain lessened once she spoke her truth. A man who lived with the guilt of betraying his own values found his body released from tension when he finally forgave himself. These are not miracles in the mystical sense. They are the natural consequence of integration. When the psyche and the body cease to be at war, health emerges as the truce. The journey of healing is not about erasing trauma. It is about unmasking it, giving it a face, a name, a voice. Only then can the body stop carrying the burden alone. Only then can we live without the constant reminder of what has been denied. The body is wise, but it is also loyal. It will carry our secrets until we decide to release them, and when we do, it will reward us with the gift of recovery. Because the truth is simple. The body suffers when the mind is silent, but it heals when the hidden is finally brought to light. There is a moment in every human life when silence becomes unbearable. We carry within us stories that were never told, emotions that were never expressed, and truths that were never spoken. These silences, though invisible, weigh heavily on the body. They press against the chest. They knot the stomach. They tighten the throat. The body becomes the prison of words that were denied, and in that prison, illness often finds fertile ground. To heal, we must dare to narrate our pain, to give voice to what has been hidden, to transform silence into language. When we speak of narrating pain, we are not talking about casual conversation. We are speaking of the profound act of naming what was once unspeakable. A person who has endured betrayal may carry the wound silently for years, believing that silence protects them from further harm. Yet in reality, silence deepens the wound. The betrayal festers in the body, manifesting as anxiety, insomnia, or even physical ailments. The act of narrating, of saying aloud, "I was betrayed, I was hurt, I was diminished," is not simply catharsis, it is liberation. It is the body's release from the burden of carrying unspoken truths. The body listens when the psyche speaks. This is why therapy, confession, or even the simple act of sharing with a trusted friend can have such profound effects on health. When pain is narrated, the body no longer needs to scream to symptoms. The immune system strengthens, the nervous system calms, the heart beats with greater rhythm. Science explains this through hormones and neurotransmitters, but the deeper truth is that the body responds to honesty. It responds to the courage of naming what was denied. Think of the person who has lost a loved one but never allowed themselves to grieve. They continue with life, pretending strength, suppressing tears, silencing sorrow. Yet the body remembers. The grief lives in the chest, pressing down with every breath. The muscles tense, the sleep is disturbed, the appetite fades. Only when that person dares to narrate their pain may they say, "I miss them, I feel empty, I am broken," does the body begin to release its grip. The tears that flow are not weakness, they are medicine. They cleanse the wound, they soften the tension, they allow the body to breathe again. Narrating pain is not about dwelling in suffering, it is about transforming suffering into meaning. When we speak our pain, we reclaim ownership of our story. We stop being victims of silence and become narrators of truth. In that act, we discover that pain, once named, loses its power to dominate us. It becomes part of our history, but no longer our prison. The body, freed from carrying the weight of silence, begins to heal. There is a dignity in speaking what was once unspeakable. To narrate pain is to honor ourselves, to acknowledge that our wounds matter, that our suffering deserves recognition. It is to say, "I will not allow silence to dictate my health." In that moment, we integrate the fragmented parts of ourselves. We stop living as divided beings, one part carrying the pain, another pretending it does not exist. Instead, we become whole, and wholeness is the foundation of healing. I have seen people who, after years of illness, found relief not in medicine alone, but in the act of narrating their story. A woman who carried the secret of abuse for decades discovered that her chronic pain lessened once she spoke her truth. A man who lived with the guilt of betraying his own values found his body released from tension when he finally admitted his shame. These are not miracles in the mystical sense, they are the natural consequence of integration. When the psyche and the body cease to be at war, health emerges as the truth. The act of narrating pain is not easy. It requires courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to confront memories we would rather avoid. But it is precisely in that confrontation that healing begins. When we give words to what was denied, when we allow ourselves to cry the tears we never shed, when we admit the anger we buried, the body responds. It is as if the body sighs in relief, finally freed from carrying the weight of secrets. But the truth is simple. The body suffers when pain is silenced, but it heals when pain is finally spoken. There is a weight that guilt places upon the human spirit, a heaviness that does not remain confined to the mind, but extends into the body. Guilt corrodes silently, like rust on iron, eating away at our vitality, our peace, and our health. It is not only an emotion, it is a force that shapes the way we breathe, the way we sleep, the way our organs function. When guilt is denied or repressed, it becomes poison. It lingers in the stomach as ulcers. It tightens the chest as anxiety. It weakens the immune system until illness finds its way in. To heal, we must transform guilt into acceptance, for only in reconciliation does the body find relief. Many of us carry guilt from choices we made, words we spoke, or actions we failed to take. Sometimes it is guilt for hurting someone we loved, sometimes for betraying our own values, sometimes for not being the person we believe we should have been. And because guilt is uncomfortable, we bury it. We tell ourselves it is forgotten, but the body remembers. The body becomes the archive of guilt, storing it in muscles, in nerves, in the rhythm of the heart. The body does not lie. It reveals what the mind tries to conceal. The path to healing begins when we stop resisting guilt and instead face it with honesty. To transform guilt into acceptance is not to excuse ourselves or deny responsibility. It is to acknowledge the wound, to recognize the human imperfection that lies at the core of our existence, and to forgive ourselves for being fallible. Acceptance is not resignation, it is liberation. It is the act of saying, yes, I made mistakes, but I am more than my mistakes. I can learn, I can grow, I can heal. In that moment, the body begins to release the tension it has carried for years. Imagine the person who has lived for decades with the guilt of abandoning a dream. They chose security over passion, and though life continued, the guilt remained. Every time they felt dissatisfaction, the body reminded them of the betrayal of their own soul. The shoulders slumped, the energy drained, the body carried the silent accusation. But when that person finally accepts their choice, when they say, I did what I thought was best at the time, and I forgive myself for not knowing more, the body responds. The shoulders lift, the breath deepens, the fatigue lessens, acceptance becomes medicine. Or think of the parent who feels guilt for not protecting their child from pain. That guilt may manifest as chronic illness, as sleepless nights, as a body that refuses to rest. Yet when that parent confronts the truth that no one can shield another from all suffering, that imperfection is part of love, they begin to reconcile with themselves. The guilt transforms into compassion, into understanding, into acceptance, and the body relieved of the burden begins to heal. The transformation of guilt into acceptance is not a single act, it is a process. It requires patience, courage, and the willingness to confront the shadows we would rather avoid. It asks us to sit with discomfort, to listen to the voice of guilt without judgment, and to respond with kindness. It is the act of embracing our humanity, of recognizing that perfection is an illusion, and that mistakes are not the end of our story, but part of its texture. When guilt is reconciled, the body finds peace, the nervous system calms, the immune system strengthens, the heart beats with steadier rhythm. Science may explain these changes through chemical reactions, but the deeper truth is that the body listens to the psyche. When the mind forgives itself, the body follows. Healing is not only physical, it is emotional, spiritual, and symbolic. I have seen people who carried guilt for years suddenly find relief when they spoke their truth, when they admitted their mistakes, when they forgave themselves. Their illnesses did not vanish overnight, but their bodies began to respond. Pain lessened, energy returned, sleep improved. It was as if the body had been waiting for permission to heal, waiting for the psyche to release the chains of guilt. To transform guilt into acceptance is to reclaim our dignity. It is to say, I am human, I am imperfect, and I am worthy of healing. In that act, we stop punishing ourselves and begin to nurture ourselves. We stop living as prisoners of the past and begin to live as authors of the present. And the body, freed from the weight of guilt, rewards us with the gift of recovery. Because the truth is simple. The body suffers when guilt is denied, but it heals when guilt is finally transformed into acceptance. There is a paradox in the way we approach life. We spend so much energy trying to appear strong, trying to hide our fragility, trying to convince ourselves and others that we are invulnerable. Yet it is precisely this resistance to vulnerability that often keeps us trapped in suffering. The body, loyal to the truth we deny, begins to carry the weight of our defenses. Muscles tighten, sleep becomes restless, the heart beats with unease. We believe we are protecting ourselves, but in reality we are imprisoning ourselves. Healing begins not when we resist, but when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. To embrace vulnerability is to accept that we are human, that we are imperfect, that we are not made of stone. It is to recognize that pain, sadness, fear, and longing are not signs of weakness, but signs of life. When we deny these emotions, the body takes on the burden. It becomes the vessel of unexpressed tears, the container of silenced fears, the archive of hidden desires. and the body, unable to carry such weight indefinitely, begins to break down. Illness is often the language of vulnerability denied. Think of the person who has lost someone they love but insists on being strong, who refuses to cry, who hides their grief behind a mask of composure. The body does not believe the mask. The grief unexpressed becomes tension in the chest, fatigue in the muscles, illness in the organs. Only when that person allows themselves to be vulnerable, when they cry, when they admit their pain, when they say, I am broken, does the body begin to release its grip. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is the doorway to healing. Or consider the individual who has lived with fear for years, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of abandonment. They build walls around themselves, walls of silence, walls of control, walls of denial. Yet those walls do not protect them, they isolate them. The body trapped behind those walls begins to suffocate. Anxiety rises, sleep disappears, the immune system weakens. But when that person dares to lower the walls, when they admit their fear, when they allow themselves to be seen in their fragility, something extraordinary happens. The body breathes again. The nervous system calms. The heart beats with greater rhythm. Vulnerability becomes medicine. Embracing vulnerability is not about exposing ourselves recklessly. It is about allowing ourselves to be authentic. It is about saying, this is who I am, with my wounds, my fears, my imperfections. In that authenticity, the body finds relief. It no longer has to carry the burden of pretending. It no longer has to scream through symptoms to express what the psyche refuses to acknowledge. Vulnerability is the act of aligning the inner truth with the outer expression, and in that alignment, healing emerges. There is a profound dignity in vulnerability. To admit that we are fragile is to honor our humanity. It is to recognize that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to face it. When we embrace vulnerability, we stop living as divided beings, one part carrying the pain, another pretending it does not exist. Instead, we become whole. And wholeness is the foundation of healing. I have seen people who carried illness for years suddenly find relief when they allow themselves to be vulnerable. A man who lived with chronic pain discovered that his suffering lessened when he admitted his loneliness. A woman who battled anxiety found peace when she spoke of her fear of abandonment. These were not miracles in the mystical sense. They were the natural consequence of authenticity. When the psyche and the body cease to be at war, health emerges as the truce. The act of embracing vulnerability requires courage. It asks us to step into uncomfortable territory, to reveal parts of ourselves we would rather hide, to trust that in our fragility lies our strength. But it is precisely in that act that healing begins. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, the body responds. It is as if the body sighs in relief, finally freed from carrying the weight of denial. Because the truth is simple. The body suffers when vulnerability is resisted, but it heals when vulnerability is finally embraced. There is a truth that many of us resist. Within each of us lives both light and shadow. We are not only the sum of our virtues, our successes, our moments of joy. We are also the sum of our fears, our mistakes, our silences, and our wounds. Yet so often we try to deny the shadow, to push it away, to pretend it does not exist. We cling to the illusion that if we only show the light, the shadow will disappear. But the body knows better. The body carries both, and when we refuse to integrate them, suffering emerges. Healing begins when we stop dividing ourselves and allow shadow and light to coexist. The shadow is not our enemy. It is the part of us that holds the truths we have not yet dared to face. It is the anger we suppressed, the grief we silenced, the desires we denied. When we reject the shadow, we reject a part of ourselves, and the body, loyal to the whole of our being, begins to protest. It protests through illness, through fatigue, through pain. The body says, you cannot heal if you do not accept all of who you are. Integration is not about erasing the shadow, it is about embracing it, giving it a place, allowing it to live alongside the light. Think of the person who has always tried to be perfect, who has hidden their flaws, who has denied their failures. On the surface they appear strong, composed, successful, but inside the shadow grows heavier. The body begins to carry the tension of this denial. Migraines, insomnia, anxiety, all of these may arise from the refusal to accept imperfection. Yet when that person finally admits, I am not perfect, I have failed, I have weaknesses, something extraordinary happens. The body relaxes, the nervous system calms. The shadow, once denied, becomes part of the whole, And in that wholeness, healing begins. Or consider the individual who has lived with anger for years but never allowed themselves to express it. They bury it, believing that anger is unacceptable, that it must be hidden. But the body does not forget. The anger lives in the muscles, tightening them, creating chronic pain. It lives in the stomach, burning like acid. It lives in the heart, pounding with unease. Only when that person allows themselves to acknowledge the anger, to give it a voice, to integrate it into their story, does the body begin to release its grip. The shadow of anger, once embraced, loses its destructive power and becomes part of the truth. Integration is not about glorifying the shadow. It is about recognizing that without shadow, light has no meaning. Without grief, joy cannot be fully appreciated. Without fear, courage cannot be understood. Without mistakes, growth cannot occur. To live authentically is to live with both. And when we live authentically, the body responds. It no longer has to carry the burden of denial. It no longer has to scream through symptoms to express what the psyche refuses to acknowledge. The body finds peace in the harmony of shadow and light. There is a profound dignity in integration. To accept both shadow and light is to honor our humanity. It is to say, I am not only my virtues, I am also my wounds. I am not only my successes, I am also my failures, and all of this makes me whole. In that act of acceptance, we stop living as fragmented beings. We stop dividing ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts. We become complete. And completeness is the foundation of healing. I have seen people who carried illness for years suddenly find relief when they allowed themselves to integrate shadow and light. A woman who lived with chronic fatigue discovered that her body regained energy when she admitted the grief she had silenced. A man who battled depression found peace when he accepted the anger he had denied. These were not miracles in the mystical sense. They were the natural consequence of wholeness. When the psyche and the body cease to be divided, health emerges as the truth. The act of integration requires courage. It asks us to confront parts of ourselves we would rather avoid, to embrace emotions we were taught to reject, to accept imperfections we tried to hide. But it is precisely in that act that healing begins. When we integrate shadow and light, the body responds. It is as if the body sighs in relief, finally freed from carrying the weight of division. Because the truth is simple, the body suffers when we deny our shadow, but it heals when shadow and light are finally embraced as one. There is a dimension of suffering that often goes unnoticed, and it is the absence of meaning. Pain without meaning becomes unbearable, a weight that crushes the spirit and drains the body of its strength. But when suffering is given a purpose, when it is understood as part of a larger story, it transforms. It ceases to be only destruction and begins to carry within it the seed of resilience. The body, which once collapsed under the heaviness of despair, begins to respond differently when the mind discovers that pain can be more than punishment. It can be a path toward growth. We live in a world that teaches us to avoid pain at all costs, to silence it, to medicate it, to deny it. Yet pain is inevitable. No life escapes grief, loss, disappointment, or illness. The question is not whether we will suffer, but how we will face suffering when it arrives. If we see it only as cruelty, we become victims of it. But if we search for meaning within it, we discover that suffering can be a teacher. It can reveal truths about ourselves, about our relationships, about the fragility and strength of life. And when the mind embraces this meaning, the body follows. Consider the person who has endured the loss of someone they love deeply. At first, the grief feels unbearable. The body weakens. The heart aches. The energy disappears. But when that person begins to find meaning in the loss, when they realize that love continues in memory, that the presence of the one they lost shaped them forever, that their pain is a testimony to the depth of their bond, the suffering transforms. The body, once paralyzed by despair, begins to regain vitality. The immune system strengthens. The nervous system calms. The heart beats with steadier rhythm. Meaning does not erase pain, but it gives pain a place, and in that place, healing begins. Or think of the individual who faces a serious illness. At first, the diagnosis feels like a sentence. The body collapses under the weight of fear. But when that person begins to see the illness as an opportunity to reconnect with themselves, to value life more deeply, to strengthen bonds with loved ones, The illness ceases to be only destruction. It becomes a catalyst for transformation. The body, nourished by this new perspective, begins to respond. Even if the illness remains, the suffering lessens because meaning has entered the story. Meaning is the bridge between the psyche and the body. When the mind finds purpose in suffering, the body no longer experiences pain as chaos. It experiences it as part of a narrative, as part of a journey. And in that narrative, resilience emerges. Resilience is not the absence of suffering. It is the ability to endure suffering without being destroyed by it. It is the capacity to rise, to continue to grow, even in the midst of pain. There is a profound dignity in seeking meaning in suffering. To do so is to refuse to be reduced to victimhood. It is to say, my pain will not define me, I will define my pain. In our act, we reclaim our agency, our humanity, our strength. We stop seeing suffering as senseless cruelty and begin to see it as part of the mystery of life, and the body freed from the weight of despair begins to heal. I have seen people who carried unbearable suffering find relief when they discovered meaning in their pain. A woman who lost her child found strength in dedicating her life to helping others who grieve. A man who battled addiction found purpose in guiding others toward recovery. Their bodies, once weakened by despair, began to regain vitality. Their suffering did not vanish, but it transformed. It became the foundation of resilience, the source of healing. The act of seeking meaning in suffering requires courage. It asks us to confront pain directly, to resist the temptation to deny it, to search for the lesson hidden within it, but it is precisely in that act that healing begins. When we give suffering a purpose, the body responds. It is as if the body sighs in relief, finally freed from carrying the weight of senselessness. Because the true truth is simple, the body suffers when pain is meaningless, but it heals when suffering is finally transformed into resilience through meaning.